Civil war raged across Hammerfell. The parched sands of the Alakir Desert were showered with the blood of countless soldiers. Redguards and Imperials alike died in droves, but the conflict was nearing its end. This is because Tiber Septim had a secret weapon ready for the final battle, a great winged beast that spewed torrents of fire so hot that even the stone walls of the city could not protect the remaining foes. At this moment, with the streets ablaze and the agony of their searing flesh, the Redguard crowns learned the severity of the Imperial sigil, the mighty dragon on a field of red. That red represented the beast's fire and the unbridled bloodshed those banners left in their wake. But what happened in Tamriel to lead to this brutality? And weren't the dragons wiped out long ago after the Dragon War in Skyrim? In the Malefic era, the dragons ruled the north. From the summit of the throat of the world, Alduin the World-Eater's dominion spread as far as the horizon in every direction. The dragons believed themselves to be superior to men. The men were small, soft, and prone to malfunction. The dragons, however, they were majesty manifest. They were fashioned in Akatosh's own divine image. The dragons were right to an extent, as dragons are undoubtedly stronger and usually far more intelligent than their bipedal servants. But with their superiority came arrogance and a willingness to neglect those they considered inferior. It was only a matter of time before the men fought back, and with the help of the legendary Parthenax, who helped them speak the violent words of the dragons, the Nords deposed of their captors. In an epic conclusion to the war, 3 Nordic heroes shouted Alduin out of the world, propelling him forward in time. They then proceeded to hunt the remaining dragons near to extinction. For some time, many of Tamriel's mortals believed the dragons were gone. Elsewhere, the native homeland of the Khajiit has always been one of the more mysterious Tamrielic provinces. Compared to most of its neighbours, relatively little information has left the region's warm sands and dense jungles. Recently though, a great deal of lore has entered the imperial records on the Khajiiti province, and it would seem that the dragons thrived here long after Alduin's downfall. Karl Grontide and his horde of dragons dominated the 16 kingdoms of Elsewhere for some time in the Malefic era, until their hubris led them to attempt to consume the power of the moons. If you wanted to unify the catfolk against you and inspire them to make martyrs of themselves, well, I couldn't think of a better way. The dragons displayed a level of conceit that would make Alduin grin with pride. The Khajiit rose up and defeated Karl Grontide, sealing the dragons away for centuries in the halls of Colossus. In the Second Era, the dragons were accidentally unleashed from captivity, and once again attempted to make real their lunar scheme. Only this time they were stopped once and for all. Even before the story of Karl Grontide entered mainstream knowledge, there was documented evidence of other dragons existing throughout the 2nd, 3rd, and even early 4th eras. There were sightings of great worms looming in the skies over the Alakir Desert. There were rumours of tamed dragons residing in the sacred grove of the Akatosh Chantry. There was even a tale of a dragon nesting in the smoking ruins of Vardenfell after the eruption of Red Mountain in the 5th year of the 4th era. But there is one particular dragon who is often overlooked when stories of sightings are exchanged. This dragon turned the tide of a bloody battle and changed the fate of Tamriel with his deeds. This dragon was named Nephala Largus. The Second Era was drawing to a close when Tiber Septim ascended to the Ruby Throne. Both as a military general and an emperor, Septim strived to unify all of Tamriel, and was driven by the promise of success given to him by the Greybeards. Talos had travelled up to High Hrothgar, answering the call of the Grey Monks. They had removed their gags, and when they spoke his name, the whole world shook. He learned to use the voice, and he ventured south to forge his empire. As the empire of Tiber Septim swept through the kingdoms of Tamriel in a glorious bid for conquest, Septim was opposed on all sides, but never more fiercely than by Hammerfell, the ancestral home of the Redguards. Despite their effective displacement of the Nedic natives and competence in battle, there has always been a rift between the Yakudan settlers in Hammerfell. This rift has torn apart fiefdoms and families alike. Without this division, the unified might of the Redguards would have struck fear into the hearts of the mightiest emperors. But the people of Hammerfell were torn between those who held the old Yakudan ways, the crowns, and those who embraced new cultures, customs, and simply welcomed a change from Yakuda's previous ruling class, the Forebears. While Tiber Septim's empire was expanding north and east, the elderly king Fasad II of Hammerfell utilized his wisdom and experience to hold off the imperial aggression. So long as he lived, there was no denying the dominance of the crowns in Hammerfell, but the king soon succumbed to his age and illness, leaving Hammerfell without an established monarch in a time when stability was absolutely vital. His son, Prince Ator, was heir apparent, but this counted for naught when the Forebears seized their opportunity to capture the capital city of Sentinel. Prince Ator had the support of the crowns, so he was confident that he would be able to recapture his birthright without too much resistance. That was until he heard that the Forebears had formed an alliance with the intimidating Imperials and their dragon-born emperor. The Forebears foresaw their defeat. The loyalist crowns had recovered their strength on the island of Stros Makai and were on the verge of retaking Sentinel, so the Forebears offered Tiber Septim that enticing deal. The Forebears were willing to hand over huge swaths of land to the Empire in exchange for the support of the Imperial legions. To Septim, this was a win-win situation. He could prolong the civil war in Hammerfell, weakening the province and dispelling any threat of future insurrections. And he would acquire significant chunks of southeast Hammerfell without any bloodshed. Septim magnanimously accepted the offer, and the legion sailed from Anvil. The crowns were furious at how far the Forebears were willing to stoop. In seeking foreign aid, they were labelled throne defilers, hosts to the invader, and most bitingly, Hunding's shame. With the favour of Frandar Hunding seemingly on their side, the crowns fought valiantly, and resisted the invaders for some time. But they could not hope to take down such a large foe, and eventually they were surrounded at Stros Makai, where they were forced to make their final bloody stand. The battle was the penultra of the crowns, and all who subscribed to the name no doubt took up arms. Under the leadership of Prince Ator, the crowns took up defensive positions across Stros Makai. This island was notorious for being the port of choice for pirates, and remarkably, the loyalist crowns and the rebel pirates made an unlikely alliance. Prince Ator's ranks were bolstered by the Restless League, a nationalist pirate syndicate operating out of a secret cove close to Stros Makai. The Imperial fleet was led by the Empire's finest naval commander, Admiral Emil Richten, and alongside him stood the Imperial emissary, a Dunmer assassin named Dram. Richten's Red Navy met Ator's crowns on the open sea, and after an incredibly close conflict, the tide began turning in Prince Ator's favour. The crowns could sense their impending victory, but Richten had his orders for what to do if this possibility seemed likely. Reluctantly, he called forth Nephalalagus. Above the red dragons painted on the sails of the Imperial fleet, the crowned soldiers saw a sight most terrible. The dragon was not painted. This one was as real as the dread the warriors suddenly felt in their guts. The majestic beast's scales shone like rubies, dancing in the light that reflected from the waters of Hunding Bay. In one critical gambit, a likely victory was incinerated by Nephalalagus, the Imperial secret weapon. Prince Ator was no fool. He was well aware of how vulnerable they were. With no shelter from the skies, the crowned soldiers stood on vessels built entirely of wood. They were standing atop their funeral pyres, and from the distance came a fire-breathing dragon. Ator swiftly commanded his ranged troops to focus all fire on felling the beast. But at that exact moment, the assassin Dram fired a poisoned arrow from Nocturnal's bow of shadows, mortally wounding the prince. The poison was too potent for even Stros Makai's archmage to save him, so the mage placed Ator's soul in a gem, moments before Nephalalagus engulfed the prince's flagship in flames. Any hope of victory left the Crown Fleet in this moment, and the few ships that were not charred and descending to the seabed fled back to the relative safety of Stros Makai. They held up in the Old Quarter district, where they were relieved to see old stone buildings. In those moments, shelter from the skies was the greatest blessing they could have hoped for. The Imperials arrived at the docks soon after, but had no intention of taking the fight to the streets. Richten signalled once again for Nephalalagus to breathe destruction upon the Old Quarter. The buildings collapsed, and the Red Guards within were cooked against the incandescent stones. Miraculously, a few warriors survived the horrors, but they were soon put to the sword by the unrelenting Admiral Richten. As always, history would be written by the victors, and that was very much the case in the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire, which was written shortly after the conquest. The book described Ator as the Mad Prince, and even claimed that many of the crowned soldiers abandoned him after witnessing the glory of the reborn empire. The guide bizarrely neglected to mention Nephalalagus. Perhaps there was no way to include the dragon without addressing the barbarity he brought to the battle. Nevertheless, he became known as a jewel of the imperial crown, and was hailed a hero by the Imperials at the time. Nephalalagus was given an important job by the new provisional governor of Stros Mackay, Emil Richten. He was to guard the soul gem containing Prince Ator, as well as a huge hoard of gold. It is said that the dragon coveted gold, and was paid generously for his service. Of course, for a dragon this should come as no surprise. On Tamriel, and from what we hear of Akavir, there is little mention of dragons having an affinity for treasure, but real-world folklore is another matter entirely. It is a common motif, especially in Norse mythology, for heroes to seek out the lair of a dragon in search of treasure. Like Fafnir, an Icelandic dwarf who was cursed to become a dragon. Fafnir would go to any length to protect his fortune, even if it means poisoning the land around him to keep trespassers away. It is a tale of greed, and an argument could be made that so too is the tale of Nephalalagus, who killed thousands without question for his payment. Nephalalagus spent the rest of his days deep underground in the treasuries. It seemed this dragon desired gold over the freedom to stretch his wings and fly. The Imperials quickly began treating Hammerfell as their own, ignorant of the forebears who'd hoped to retain some form of control over their province. Crowns and crown sympathizers were wiped out, and Governor Richten even allowed the notorious necromancer Slode Nagasta to openly carry out profane experiments on the Redguard populace. It was only a matter of time before a rebellion became inevitable, and when it came, the Redguards needed the soul gem containing Prince Ator. The leader of the Restless League, Izara, stole the gem, but she made the mistake of seeking Nagasta's help, who captured her and delivered the gem to Richten. This is when the gem was given to Nephalalagus for safekeeping. Shortly after her disappearance, Izara's brother, the legendary Redguard hero Cyrus, came into play. Cyrus confronted Nephalalagus in the shadowy expanses of the underground treasury. Here in the Dragon's Chamber, the irony was thick in the stale air. Nephalalagus, for all of his savagery, had been brilliant in the Battle of Hunding Bay. He had soared high above the battlefield. He had been the Empire's prize, more valuable than an ocean of gold. He had shone in the sun like a huge, meticulously cut ruby. Underground, Nephalalagus had all the gold he could ever want. Yet he spent his entire life guarding it. When Cyrus arrived in the Dragon's Chamber, Nephalalagus said, "I shan't lie to you, good stranger. My imperial loyalty is indeed well paid for." And he refers to himself as a mercenary. Cyrus slew Nephalalagus in that very chamber, and no amount of gold could save the dragon from his fate. Cyrus proceeded to use a sword imbued with the soul of Ator to kill Admiral Richten and cleave Ram in half. And then the Treaty of Stros Mackay was signed, ending the bloodshed and providing significantly better terms for the Redguards, though nothing would stop the internal conflict that would forever be waged between crowns and forebears. And that, ladies and gents, was the story of Nephalalagus, the Red Dragon of the Empire. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Drew, and I'll see you in the next one.